Shabbat Shalom. We now have our second opportunity to hear Professor Newman as he talks to us about the complex world of decision-making as we think about the issues that we face in the world. Professor Newman has written many books, many of them on theology, but many on ethics and how to really navigate the difficult ethical decisions of human life, especially from a Jewish perspective. Most recently, he's written, though, on thinking critically in college, the essential handbook for student success. And we really do need college students to begin to think critically and to look at issues not just in black and white, but to understand really what's going on. So Professor Newman has many important things to share with us. He has a very long bio, which I encourage people to look at, but he gave us a fascinating talk on how to put Judaism back into ethics last night. And we look forward to his talk now, after lunch, and then tomorrow morning as well.
Thank you, Rabbi Kunin. What I want to speak about this morning is what I believe to be one of the most dramatic episodes in all of the Torah. It falls, however, in the first third of the triennial cycle, so we didn't actually read it this morning. So I want to encourage you to take out your Chumashim and turn to page 198, to the beginning of our Parsha. I'll begin by recapping the story of Jacob and Esau, which I'm sure most of you remember well, before we get to this particular juncture in their story. You'll recall that Jacob and Esau were antagonists in the womb even before birth, that Jacob cheats Esau out of the birthright and then masquerades as Esau to get Isaac's blessing. Esau, of course, is enraged. He's ready to kill Jacob, apparently. And then Jacob flees to Lavan, his uncle, and the two of them have no further contact for the next 20 years, so far as we know. And it's at that point that our Parsha opens on page 198. This is chapter 32, verse 4. And I'm going to read through, this is a lengthy narrative, but I think it's worth reviewing because there are so many important details in it, and I'll want to sort of refer back to some of them as we go. So Jacob sent messengers ahead to his brother Esau in the land of Seir. And again, jumping ahead, thus shall you say to my lord Esau, thus says your servant Jacob, I stayed with Laban and have remained until now. I've acquired all of these animals and wealth and so forth. Then the messengers, this is verse 7, returned to Jacob saying, we came to your brother Esau. He himself is coming to meet you. You're heading toward him. He's heading toward you. There are 400 men with him. Jacob was greatly frightened. You can imagine why. In his anxiety, he divided the people with him and the flocks and the herds and the camels into two camps, thinking if Esau comes to the one camp and attacks it, the other camp may yet escape. And then he prays to God to return him to the land. That starts in verse 10 and continues. Let's shift over to the next page, starting in verse 14. This is the top of page 200. He talks about all of the many animals that he's bringing with him. And then he begins to give a charge to his servants. This is now verse 17. These he put in charge of his servants drove by drove, and he told his servants, go on ahead and keep a distance between droves. He's dividing the servants and all of these animals into sort of separate groups. He instructed the one in front as follows, when my brother Esau meets you and asks you, whose man are you? Where are you going? And whose animals are these ahead of you? You shall answer, your servant Jacob's. They are a gift sent to my lord Esau, and Jacob himself is right behind us. And then he gives similar instructions to the next group, and then to the next group, and so on. And down toward the bottom of that paragraph, verse 21, you shall add, and your servant Jacob himself is right behind us. And he reasoned, if I propitiate him with presents in advance and then face him, perhaps he will show me favor. And so the gift went on ahead while he remained in the camp that night. Now, then we take an interlude to another incredibly dramatic and important episode, which we're going to skip over because it's not the subject of my remarks this morning, but that, of course, is the famous wrestling that Rabbi Kunin referred to earlier. And then we move on to the actual meeting of Jacob and Esau, which happens at the beginning of chapter 33. So this is page 203. And this is the part where we will read it in full because it's really the dramatic climax of this relationship between the two brothers. So chapter 33, verse 1. Looking up, Jacob saw Esau coming, accompanied by 400 men. He divided the children among Leah, Rachel, and the two maids, putting the maids and their children first, Leah and her children next, and Rachel and Joseph last. He himself went on ahead and bowed low to the ground 7 times until he was near his brother. Esau ran to greet him. He embraced him, and falling on his neck, he kissed him, and they wept. Notice that there's an issue about the kissing him, which has to do with certain dots that appear over that word in the text. We'll come back to that. Looking about, he saw the women and the children. Who, he asked, are these with you? He, Jacob, answered, the children with whom God has favored your servant. Then the maids with their children came forward and bowed low, and Leah and her children came forward and bowed low, and last Joseph and Rachel came forward and bowed low. And he asked, Esau asked, what do you mean by all this company which I've met? He answered, to gain my Lord's favor. Esau said, I have enough, my brother. Let what you have remain yours. But Jacob said, no, I pray you, if you would do me this favor, accept from me this gift. For to see your face is like seeing the face of God, and you have received me favorably. Please accept my present, which has been brought to you, for God has favored me, and I have plenty. And when he urged him, Esau, finally accepted. And then Esau says, let us start on our journey, and I will proceed at your pace. But he said to him, my Lord knows that the children are frail, and the flocks and the herds which are nursing our care to me. If they have driven hard a single day, all the flocks will die. Let my Lord go on ahead of his servant while I travel slowly at the pace of the cattle before me and at the pace of the children until I come to my Lord in Seir. And then Esau says again, let me assign to you some of the men who are with me. But Jacob responds, oh no, my Lord is too kind to me. So Esau starts back on his way to Seir, and Jacob journeys on to Sukkot, and the two brothers part. Quite a dramatic moment in their relationship, to be sure. So it's clear Jacob is still afraid of Esau's wrath. He's very worried that his family will be attacked. He divides them into groups. He sends all of these gifts in advance to appease his brother. But when they finally meet, Esau greets his brother and embraces him and kisses him. Esau declines, initially at least, to take Jacob's gifts. Seeing Esau, Jacob proclaims, is like seeing God. What could be more dramatic than that? And Esau even offers to accompany Jacob on his journey, but then declines and they part. So what we're dealing with here, in essence, is a broken relationship and a reconciliation. I think it's a theme we can all probably relate to. Indeed, had it been my choice, I think this would have been a fine reading for the high holidays, given its focus on the issue of forgiveness. But nobody asked me. So let's begin for a moment with Jacob's experience. He's cheated his brother. He's deceived his father. He knows in his heart of hearts that his father's blessing was undeserved. But then he spends all those years with Laban, who of course deceives him, first offering him one daughter for whom he has to work 7 years, but then tricking him to serving another 7 years for the daughter that he really wanted. And now you have to imagine that Jacob has been humbled. He's had a bit of a taste of his own medicine, you might say. He recognizes maybe finally that he needs to make amends to his brother. Because after all, he's now acquired all of this wealth, but he still stole the birthright from his brother. And the birthright would have been a very valuable thing for Esau. So he approaches Esau in our story here with great humility, bowing low and referring to him deferentially over and over. That's Jacob. But what about Esau? The Torah really doesn't tell us a thing about what's happened to him in all the intervening years. We have to explore what his inner life must have been like. The rabbis, as always, fill in the blanks, although in a certain way, in their own particular way. Now, from the rabbi's perspective, and this is actually reflected even in the Haftarah that we just heard, Esau is Jacob's primary antagonist. Esau is regarded in rabbinic literature as the ancestor of Amalek, the ultimate enemy of the Israelites. He's the ancestor of Haman, who of course is the villain of the Esther story, of the Purim story. He's associated with the Roman Empire. He comes later to be associated with Christianity. Esau versus Jacob, actually in the rabbinic mind, becomes the paradigm of the wild, hairy, violent hunter versus the sensitive, righteous patriarch of our nation, the Israelites. Consistently, Esau is denigrated and Jacob is venerated. But here in our parsha, we see Esau being gracious, embracing Jacob, declining his gifts, offering to travel with him. There is no hint of hostility, much less intent to murder, no mention of the past, no expression of resentment. The text doesn't reveal his thoughts, but surely his actions suggest that he's forgiven Jacob. Now, the rabbis, given their dominant perspective, as I mentioned a moment ago, debate whether Esau is genuinely forgiving in this episode or not. And that oddity now of those 4 dots over the word Vayishlach in verse 4 has been interpreted by the rabbis. That's a particular scribal peculiarity, and it's always there to represent something funny about that word, something dramatic or meaningful about that word, that Esau kisses his brother Jacob. And the rabbis even go so far as to reinterpret the word Vayishlach using a different root meaning to bite. So he didn't try to actually kiss him, he tried to bite him on the neck. That's the hunter Jacob, that's the hunter Esau. We'll return to that issue in a moment. But notwithstanding the rabbi's struggle to reconcile Esau, the evil antagonist, with Esau, the loving, accepting brother, I think the straightforward meaning of our story is pretty clear. And in fact, Ibn Ezra, the famous biblical medieval commentator, said it this way. The pshat, the plain meaning, is that Esau had no intention of doing anything bad to his brother. And the proof is, and they cried, just as Joseph and his brothers did. Genuine remorse and genuine reconciliation. So my question to you is, how has time healed Esau's wounds? Why is he now prepared to forgive? How has that angry, disenfranchised brother become the generous, loving brother? And here we need to create our own midrash, I think, filling in the blanks, if you will, drawing on our own experience. So I want you, as we go, to think about your own experience, I'm sure all of us have one, of being wronged by someone, but perhaps eventually of reaching a place where we can let go and forgive. I want to present a number of options of what's happened to Esau and see which ones resonate with you. Option 1. Esau's had a successful life. The effects of Jacob's transgression really haven't persisted. He no longer looks back with regret or resentment on the life he could have had. As he says, literally in the story, I have enough. I no longer need that birthright. Keep it. I'm fine, thank you. I'm really fine. Option 2. Time has changed Esau's perspective. What originally seemed like a grave transgression has turned out to be a blessing in disguise. He comes to recognize that being heir in this Israelite clan carries a whole lot of burdens that he may not actually want or even envy. He's free of his father Isaac's expectations. He no longer needs or wants his father's blessing. He's his own man, and he has other goals for himself. Option 3. Esau comes to realize that nursing resentment only hurts him. He chooses to let bygones be bygones, as we say. He knows that he could nurse his wounds if he wanted, but he'll pay a psychic price if he does. He wants to be free of the past, emotionally. He hasn't really forgiven Jacob. He knows he was wrong, but he's just tired of the psychic toll it takes to keep replaying those old tapes. He chooses to move past resentment and embrace Jacob wholeheartedly. And in fact, one of the rabbinic commentaries in Genesis Rabbah says exactly that. Quote, "It is well known that Esau hates Jacob, but in that moment he turned and kissed him with all his heart." And here's maybe the final option. Esau is moved by the extravagant gifts that Jacob offers him and the deference that Jacob shows him. He knows that Jacob is trying to compensate him for the birthright that he'd wrongfully taken from him. Maybe until that very moment of their meeting, he really did have the intent to kill Jacob, but he's finally moved by Jacob's generosity and effort to make amends. And this reading actually is reflected in Nachmanides, Ramban, the medieval commentator, biblical commentator, who writes as follows. In the end, when Esau saw the great honor that Jacob bestowed upon him, how he prostrated himself before him, bowing to the ground 7 times, you'll recall, from the distance until he approached him, his mercy was aroused, and he thought that Jacob was recognizing his birthright and his preeminence, and with this, he was comforted. There are, I think, actually many ways to imagine what has transpired with Esau. I think we all have lots of experience with this, perhaps with small slights, even to huge betrayals. All of us, I think, if we've lived long enough, have had ruptures in one relationship or another. And so my question to you now is, what enables us to forgive when we have? What has held us back from forgiving when we haven't? What makes forgiveness so difficult? Now, there are a number of ways of answering this. There's a lot of research on the issue of forgiveness, in fact. Fundamentally, I think we're reticent to forgive because being the wronged party is actually powerful. The person who harmed us owes us, and we don't want to relinquish that power. It's also true that we sometimes are helped to forgive when we can see the offender and the offense against us in a larger context. In the words of Brian Stevenson, famous lawyer and advocate, about whom the movie, thank you, Just Mercy, I blanked on it for a moment, the book and the movie Just Mercy were written. He writes, "We are all better than the worst thing we've ever done." And when we begin to see the person who harmed us in that light, we move from being focused just on the offense against us to seeing maybe that offense in a larger perspective. Rabbi Nachman also spoke about this when he wrote that we should focus on the one little good part of every person, no matter how bad they are, and then on the basis of that little bit of goodness that we see, judge them favorably. Now, however you read Esau's transformation, he's a model of change of heart. So I want us to ponder, what would it mean to emulate Esau? How can we become more Esau-like? That's a question I suspect that the rabbis would have been appalled by, given their view of Esau. But it's a worthwhile question, I think. But now I want to shift a bit from Esau to Jacob. How is he taking in Esau's gestures? The text doesn't exactly tell us. We don't know how Jacob receives Esau. We know that they embrace and cry, but we also know that he doesn't want to accompany Esau or have Esau accompany him any further along this road. Probably Jacob doesn't know what to make of Esau or what to expect of him. He remains wary, maybe, but also grateful for Esau's kindness. Part of Jacob is stuck in his experience of Esau 20 years ago, when Esau was ready to kill him. But another part of Jacob knows that he is changed. He himself, Jacob, has changed over these intervening years. Perhaps Esau has also. Jacob then is torn between two perspectives, two instincts. The same two perspectives that we found in the rabbis' debate, actually, about Esau. Remember, some, the minority of rabbis over the centuries, have seen the plain meaning of this story as Esau is forgiving and compassionate and loving. But others, perhaps most of them, continue to pigeonhole Esau as the perennial enemy, the angry, threatening, forever jealous of his younger brother. And here, too, I think there are lessons for us. For we have all, at one time or another, been Jacob. We know what it feels like to face our enemy or antagonist, the person we've been in conflict with. So I want you now to think of a time when you've been stuck in a conflictual relationship, perhaps with a family member, a friend, or a coworker. Which Jacob were you? How did you approach your Esau? Did you consider the possibility that that person has softened toward you so that you can reconnect and put your differences behind you? Or did you respond from a place of anger and resentment? Like Jacob, we always have the choice to see our antagonists, our Esau's, in a compassionate, open-hearted way, or in a fearful, suspicious way. So I want to leave you now with two quotes, neither of which is Jewish, by the way, but I think both of which actually are pertinent to this whole encounter. The first is about forgiveness. It's been attributed to many different people, so I don't really know whose quote it is. But I think it is the primary quality that Esau exhibits in this story, and it's this. Forgiveness is giving up all hope of a better past. I'm going to say that again because it takes a while to let that come through. Forgiveness is giving up all hope of a better past. And second, there's a parable that you may well have heard, but I think it has special resonance in connection with the inner choice that Jacob confronts in terms of how he's going to approach his long estranged brother. And the story goes like this. It's a bit of a parable. A grandfather is talking with his grandson. The grandfather says, "In life, there are two wolves inside of us which are always at battle. One is a good wolf, which represents things like kindness, bravery, and love. The other is a bad wolf, which represents things like greed, hatred, and fear." The grandson stops and thinks about it for a while, and then looks up at his grandfather and says, "Grandfather, which one wins?" And the grandfather replies, "The one you feed more." Like Esau, all of us have opportunities to forgive, to give up hope of a better past. And like Jacob, all of us have a choice about which one of our inner wolves to feed. May we all make those choices wisely and lovingly. Shabbat Shalom.